All right. I apologize for the abrupt end to that first part of our video. I was going to break it up into two parts anyway, but my recording software unexpectedly crashed, and so it just made me do that a little bit more abrupt than I was planning. So hopefully we'll be able to just pick right back up here where we left off, and breaking it up into smaller chunks anyway. That was kind of my plan, so that you don't have a 50 or a 60 whatever minute video in one shot. You can just watch in part at a time. Regardless, here we are. So we were looking at the developer tools. I was talking about the network tab. And so this is where we're going to spend the most of our time here for the rest of this discussion today. And you're going to be able to use it now throughout the rest of your career as a security professional. This tells us information about all the different requests and response that this page is doing. And in this case, so we're at d2l.sdbor.edu. You can see here it's telling you that you need to reload the page in order to get information about it, and that's fine. So we'll just reload this page once we have this tab open. And as this page reloads, then what you see is information about all the requests that were made to this application itself. If you look down here at the bottom, you have the ability to filter. So as you get interested in particular things about the site, that maybe just the HTML documents, maybe just the CSS, you can add and filter. You can see if you go to a lot of different sites and just have all of this on and load pages up using the network. You go to a news site and you'll see that they have a variety. There's just a surprising amount of requests that are made for every single page that you visit. There should be no wonder after going to a few pages like that why some pages are so slow. For this one though, we're going to filter on just the HTML, because what we're doing is we're requesting documents, we're requesting pages. They're not always a .html extension, but that's fine. And so we're just going to focus on that just to get rid of some of the clutter. Looking at the results here, you have 200, so there's our status code. So those status codes that we just went through, 200 means that everything was okay. You'll have other statuses based on the results, and so if we go back to all, you'll see that we have other statuses here, 304s, 200s, and some of these deal with redirections or cached content. Going back to HTML then, we have our method, so we'll talk a little bit here later on in the semester about get and post. And so we have a get method, which just means it's largely focused on how information is transferred to that web server. You can see here we have query string values. Okay, so again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't want to get into too many, try to cover too many topics here today in just our first couple videos together. This is what we were requesting, right? So we don't need that logout link there. We're just requesting d2l.sdbor.edu. Right? So we're just requesting the default page for that domain, the domain being d2l.sdbor.edu. So the default page, when you don't type something in here, oftentimes you'll see something like index. I don't know what d2l uses, but index.php. Yeah, okay, so something happened there. But oftentimes you'll see that page there. In the absence of a page, then you just get the default. And in this case, this is what we're requesting. So if you see a file, just the /, it's just telling that web server, give me the default document, default page. From there, it tells us the type and some timing and some size information. If we click on that, then this is more important, because now we have information about those HTTP headers. Okay, so it's grouped into two different types. So we have the response headers and request headers. Request headers are what we sent to the server, right? And so you can see here that we sent information about our browser. We sent some information about what it should accept. There's some things here that aren't really all that important right now. DNT, which means do not track, so this browser is configured to send a do not track. Our host is d2l.sdbor.edu. These are additional headers that we send, but they're not necessarily displayed the same down here. So again, here's the URL, here's the method, and then there's our response. The server then sent back a response, and these are all the headers that the server sent back. And so again, there's a variety of them that will become more interesting to us the further along that we get. One of them, because we've already talked about that, is the server header. Right, so this server is telling us that it's a Microsoft IIS server version 7.5, and it's powered by ASP.NET. So we got a pretty good idea that this is in fact a Microsoft web server and that it is an ASP.NET application. And so that's good information when we're just trying to fingerprint or understand. We'll talk about methodology here, trying to understand these servers, and information about the application that we're dealing with. If we do, let's say that we log in. All right, so I'll go ahead and my username and password have already populated. So I'll click the login button, and we'll see information. Okay, so a couple things happened here. We had a post which sent our information, and then eventually we got to the home page. Right, so D2L home, and there's home. So you can see that requested URL right here in our browser. What was interesting about this post, right? So we posted information, which just simply means that we sent that information in that form, that username and password. The server responded, it processed it, and then it sent a 302 back to us, which said it found it, but I want you to go somewhere else, which is to this page here, right? So there was a couple of things that happened before we got dropped onto that page, although it's not always obvious that was the case because it happened so quickly. This post request, what's interesting about this is that in the response headers, we have this set cookie value, right? So we talked a little bit about that. What this is telling us, telling our browser to do, is it's saying set a cookie, D2L session val equals, and then this cryptic value, or this random kind of nonsensey looking thing. There's additional information here, but the important thing is this is the session identifier. And so this is how this application is establishing a statefulness with me, with my client, with this browser. This is how it makes it possible for me to log in, for this to just be me logged in, to have information in my website that's unique to me, the courses that I teach, the information, my profile, everything. It's how it works for all of us. This value here is going to be unique. So every time I log out and log back in, it's going to be a different value. If you stole this value from me right now, if you were watching this video in real time and you took this value and typed it into your browser and set it as a cookie in your browser, then you would have my session, right? Because the only thing that the browser and the server understand is this value. If I present that to the server is going to say, oh, that's Josh, and here's the session for Josh. And if you take that from me, there are some additional security things that we can do to try to prevent that. But if you take that from me, there's a good chance then you could essentially steal my session. And so that's why it's very important that you understand in the life cycle of a web application that if you can get access to this information, then you can essentially steal it. You can hijack that session. So it is session hijacking. In order for this to work, then what you'll see here is if we go to, so we had a post request and then we were redirected, and so now we have a GET request. What you'll see with this GET request, these are request headers, is that we send those cookies every single time. So every single time we connect to a website, right? These are our HTTP headers. Every time we connect to that web server, we send those cookie values. And so our request comes in, that server processes those cookies and says, oh, here's the session identifier for Josh, and then it can tailor its response based off of this fact, off of this session identifier. Right? So if I deleted this cookie and I tried to connect, I made another request to the site, it would fail because the server would not be able to understand who I am. And what it should do is redirect me back to the login page. And so you don't have an active session, please log in again, and we'll be good to go. All right? So these are the things that are sent every time. HTTP response and request, they're all headers, and they're what makes your ability from your browser it makes you able to connect to these sites and interact with these web applications. Okay, right, so let's tie it all together, and this is more of a big picture. All right, so I just wanted to make sure that you've at least heard or thought through this process in a little bit deeper detail. We don't necessarily need to understand this 100% to get through our labs together, because we're really just going to focus on the application itself and a little bit about that HTTP protocol. But in general, what happens is you open up your browser, you go to a page here, you type in a URL. You type in that URL because you know that site is hosted somewhere on the internet and you can get access to it. Before your browser connects to that server, it has to resolve this URL, and that's going to be in the form of an IP address. So it makes a DNS request. That DNS request then is resolved to an IP address. Your browser takes that IP address and now it connects to that server, right? It's transparent to us because as human beings we don't like numbers. An IP address is just simply a number, 192.168.1.100. But for us, DSU.edu is much easier to remember. So that all happens behind the scenes, right? It's important to understand it happens, but it happens behind the scenes. From there, we then have established that connection, so our HTTP request is sent. The server processes the request, looks at those request headers, and it sends back a response. So we get our response headers. And inside of those response headers is the content of the web page itself, right? And then this continues. So we just continue this cycle of HTTP requests and response as we navigate through the application, the website. Okay. If you looked at our browsers present us with this HTTP request response method, pretty clean. It looks pretty nice because it's presented through that graphical interface of the browser. We may talk about it at some point. I'm not sure, but we can talk about how we can make just raw HTTP requests from from the command line. Right? Maybe we'll talk about that. But essentially, and we saw this in the syntax of the browser or in the interface of the browser. We saw that we made a GET or a POST request for this file using the HTTP protocol. That was sent to the server. The server finds that file somewhere on, inside of its file system, because websites on a web server are nothing more than files and folders. It reads the file, and then it sends the response. So we're going to have a combination of those response headers, so HTTP status code, as well as the HTML itself, and then that's sent back to the browser, and then the browser it parses it, it understands it, it makes it look like it does as you're interacting with it through your browser. Okay, in general we're going to talk about methodologies, right? So we have the basic understandings of how we interact with a web server, and how we're going to do that then is through our VM. So we're going to set up a VM. I'm going to show you a couple different options to do that, and then inside of that VM you're going to set up your application in order to test. And so all of you're going to have the same exact process. You're going to establish a connection to the server, you're going to make HTTP requests and response, but it's always going to be just within that VM. And so we'll work through that here as we go through the labs. We're going to follow a handful of tools through the book, and so we're going to try to get a basic understanding and then explore that basic understanding through the use of some of these tools. There are a lot more out there, so please feel free to explore beyond what we talk about in the book. We're going to have a general approach to what we're doing, and we're going to generally approach this in this 4 steps here: reconnaissance, scanning, exploitation, and then potentially proposing or fixing an application ourselves. This will be about the same approach we have when we move into the second book and talk about network scanning and vulnerability scanning and stuff. So you'll see a very similar approach here when we do it. The book talks about a couple of different formalized approaches, so please take some time to read about that and maybe even follow the URLs to get a better understanding of what those are. We'll talk about here as we get further into the course about web vulnerabilities. These are the things that we're going to be looking for that we can essentially exploit in the application. I would encourage you to go to the OWASP homepage. OWASP.org is how you get there, because this is the whole focus of this. It's a nonprofit international organization, and what they focus on is web application security. There is just a ton of, if you just start here in the top, tools that we'll talk about, cheat sheets, top 10, development guides, all sorts of really great free open source tools. And so we'll talk about these here as we go, but I encourage you to take some time and look at them now, or at least bookmark this for later use in your career, because there's a lot of really good information, a lot of really good tools here that you can use. We'll talk about injection. We'll talk about cross-site scripting here in a little bit later. That's not the focus for this first lab, but it will be later on in the chapter. Right? So, if you want to read ahead, go to OWASP, look at those top 10. That top 10 list is going to have top 10 vulnerabilities. Right? So those will be the things that we're going to focus on, and it'll get you a great head start. Okay, for lab 1, there's a document in our Google Drive. So if you go into labs, there'll also be a Dropbox open. This document here is the same one that I had opened up. And so this document will be relatively verbose in that It's going to lay out, this is going to be the foundation for the course. So please take some time, make sure you understand what we're doing, and get everything set up appropriately so that you don't have any issues with your environment as we get moving into more of the hands-on portions of the lab. Read through this. This does coincide loosely with pages 11 through 18 of the Basics of Web Hacking book, and so most of the steps are outlined there for you to follow. You have some options. Okay, so we're going to have two primary Linux distributions that we're going to work with, Backtrack 5 or Kali. I would encourage you to get both, create both of them as a VM and set those up, and then kind of do them both redundantly. The problem that you're going to run into is that the book still uses Backtrack 5, and Backtrack 5 is no longer supported, and so you can't just go to the original website that hosted Backtrack 5 and downloaded it. So in order to get Backtrack 5, what I have done in our course folder is there's an ISOs and VMs folder, and here is a copy of Backtrack 5. Okay, so you can download that. It's a very large file. It's 2 gigabytes. So make sure that when you, if you initiate that download, you're prepared to do it. You can download it. You need 7-zip to extract that. So just search for 7-zip. It's a very popular and becoming a much more common compression format or algorithm. So you can find a way to extract that, and I'll show you what that looks like once you've extracted that. I've also uploaded the torrent. This torrent was still live and active as of, I don't know, a few months ago, so I can't guarantee that it still is, but if you want to try to download your own copy of this Backtrack 5, you can try to do it via BitTorrent, so this would be a BitTorrent to do that. Outside of this, maybe you already have a copy. Feel free to use that. It's up to you. Otherwise, there is the potential that we can use our IA lab, our Information Assurance Lab. And so if that's something that you want me to do or set up for you, just let me know, send me an email. We can work together and get that set up. And what that will provide you with is a VM that you can access through your browser. So there's a little less configuration. You don't have to worry about downloading anything. But I prefer that you set up your own VMs and run those locally. One, because it's important to have that experience of working directly with those virtualization software. And two, then you have something to keep at the end of the course. So you have a VM, you can start customizing it, you can start installing tools, you have the software that we use, and it's now yours to keep for as long as you want to keep it. So I think that's important to have. The other option is Kali. This is going to be the replacement to Backtrack, the successor to Backtrack. It's supported, it's active. You can go to their site, kali.org, you can download it. If you go to their download page, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to download an ISO. That's a disk image, and you'll have to create a new VM, right? So I will leave that up to you to figure out. If you have any trouble with it, though, don't hesitate to contact me so I can point you in the right direction. I don't want you to get hung up on this, but I do want you to, if you have not done that before, and you go the Kali route, that you do get that experience, because it is important, because you're going to use VMs for the rest of your career. If you do download this, make sure you understand which version you're downloading. Note that it is a very large download. You'll probably want the 32-bit, but if you have a 64-bit machine, you can download 64-bit either. Just remember, though, if you are 32-bit, you cannot install 64-bit. So just make sure you keep that in mind, because that can cause you trouble. As far as the virtualization software goes, what the book uses is Vmware Player. And so you'll want to probably get a copy of Vmware Player, not Pro. Pro costs money, but if you go to Downloads and over to Free Products, you can see Player. And so VMware Player is something that you can install, and that will allow you to not only play this virtual machine that you download and extract here, but also set up and install your own. Right? So you can create new virtual machines, and then this is free. The player will run only on Windows, and so if you're on a Mac, you have to buy Fusions, which is not always the best option for everyone. If you're on a Linux, you'd have to buy Workstation. VirtualBox is a option that you would have for any platform. It's open source, it's free, and it's developed by Oracle. It's maybe not necessarily as robust as VMware Player, but it will work. It will be different, though, than using VMware Player. Right? So you have a couple of different options there. Let's see. So regardless of your choice, the focus of this lab is to get a virtual machine for you to work on the labs in, so either Backtrack or Kali, and then also to get the DVWA installed. Okay, you have two options to do that, and here are some hints that I give you in order to do that. The first one and the book has a script that should work with Backtrack, although you're going to have to make some modifications. And so this bullet here talks you through what you need to modify. If you look at the script, you're going to see that this URL and this may not be valid anymore either. I think we're on 1078, so you may even have to update this. I'll update this document to reflect that. But you may have to upload, just simply change where this is getting downloaded, right? So take a look at that script. If you go that route, then make sure that you follow, you make the modifications appropriately. And I've tried to highlight here, you're changing this script from this to this. And if this version number changes, I will get this updated by the time you watch this. The second option that you have is if you install this on Kali, then I have updated the script. And you can download it at this location, and that's the script to install it on Kali. And so that script will go through, and this is a result of running that output here. You can see it'll install everything for you. And so the end result is two things, right? One is a machine, a virtual machine that you can run on your laptop or desktop, whatever you're using. And the second then is to be able to navigate to the DVWA application, right? So a couple different options for you to choose. Once you extract, so I'm going to open up my desktop here, it's awfully cluttered. Once you extract your that download, so let's say that you go the Backtrack 5 route, you extract it, you open it up, you're going to see a variety of files inside of there. You'll probably have less because I've been running this machine. You can go to the one with a .vmx extension and double click that, and that will launch the machine for you. All right, so this will launch VM. I have VMware Fusion on this machine, on this MacBook, and this will just boot up that virtual machine. Right, so if you download that VM, you should be just good to go. If you go with the Kali route, you'll have to install it, in which case you'll just need to look up how to do that, or send me an email and I can help you out. The first time that Backtrack boots, you're going to get this information here, and you're going to just have a login at the console. Right, so root is the password, and root backwards, or I'm sorry, root is the username, and root backwards is the password. So TOOR is your password. So that logs in. You'll have the same credentials for Kali, so root and tor. Once you're here, so on Backtrack, in order to get into a graphical desktop, you have to say startx. And what startx will do will get us into the desktop. I believe Kali boots right into it just on its own. Okay. From there, we have, again, a handful of things we need to take a look at here real quick. The first one is if you run that script, oh my goodness, this isn't working. Okay, so let's just give this a second here and see if my VM recovers itself. It's not working at all. Every time I click, it resets itself to the center. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause it and then restart it and see maybe there's just an issue with the drivers. Virtual machines are not perfect. You'll run into issues like this frequently enough, and so sometimes it's just as easy to, there we go, so that looks like that fixed it. Pause it, restart it, reboot it. Okay, so oftentimes we're going to do a lot of things from the command line. So if you go into your machine and you click on that icon there, again, it's going to differ based off of Backtrack Kali, but the end result is the same. You're going to be able to open up a terminal, and from there, we're going to want to make sure two things. The first one is that if you run the script's going to take care of this for you. And you know what, in fact, let's just take a look at that script real quick. Okay, so this is the one for Kali, and you'll see that it's very similar to the one for Backtrack. It's a bash script, and so there's a lot of things going on in here. We download the code for DVWA. We unzip the code. We remove that zip because it's been extracted. We copy it, and we copy that into the web root. Okay, so again, there's some default locations. The book will talk about those for websites. On a Linux machine, it's /var/www. From there, it'll remove the old file here. It makes some modifications. Right? So if you don't use this script, your ability to set up DVWA gets a little more challenging, but you could still read this script and figure out what to do. So it makes some modifications to the environment there, changes some permissions here, and then we start. We start Apache and we start MySQL. Right? So we need not only a web server, but we also need a database server. And so we need to make sure that both of those processes are started. From there, some more configuration changes, some changes to the database, and then we're done. Right? So you should be able to use one of those two scripts and get it to work without any problems. When you log into your machine then, you can say sudo service Apache 2 start. And that'll make sure that your Apache service has started. Same with MySQL. Okay, so MySQL will be the web server for this machine. So you can say sudo server MySQL start, and that'll make sure that the MySQL service is started. Right? So if you're ever having any trouble getting to DBWA after you've installed it, make sure both of those services are started. If they're not, you're not going to be able to access it. All right, because we have a web server now running on this machine locally, if we open up a browser, then all we have to do, and you can see it did that by default, is go to localhost. And localhost then contacts the local server on this machine. So we should be good. So you'll know you're done with the lab when you're able to get this screenshot inside of your VM. When you log out, or if you log out, when you first run this, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see the login page. And so the default username is admin, and the default password is password. Okay. All right. So again, this the purpose of this lab is to get familiar with some of the basics in Linux, some of the basics with getting this website set up. The scripts are there to help, although you may have to make some slight modifications, at least to the backtrack one. Let's see, virtualization, getting a virtual machine set up as well. Right? So those are the primary goals here. If you're running into any issues, these labs are not intended to take a long time. They're intended to introduce you to these concepts, and so you may have to do a little bit of research to make sure you understand everything that's going on, and that's good. That's a part of the lab, but they're not intended to frustrate you. So if you're getting frustrated with anything, please let me know so that I can help point you in the right direction. Don't spend a ton of time feeling like you're just spinning your wheels. Let me know. I'll point you in the right direction. All right, that's it. Next week, we'll move into the next chapter. So remember, we're skipping chapter 2. We'll move into chapter 3, and we'll talk more about getting hands-on with hacking this particular application. So thanks. I'll talk to you then.